Thrivers. Welcome to Thriving Purposefully with me, Jocelyn. I'm very excited to introduce the first guest of Thriving Purposefully. Mallory is an author, speaker, life coach, behavior analyst, mindfulness act mentor, and mama of two littles, whose mission is to help people live a life they love and are fully obsessed with in balance of all the parts of themselves. Welcome, Mallory. I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Jocelyn. It's such an honor to be your first guest and to see this all become. It's very exciting to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this for a while.
For a
And it's
while.
finally here. Yeah, years. We played around with the idea of a podcast, and here she is.
Amazing.
So let's get started. Tell me about a book you've read or a quote that resonates with you and what it means to you.
Sure. So when you asked that question and I had a little time to prepare, I was like immediately drawn to, inspirational books that I've read or self-help books that I read. And I was like, that's not actually what I'm going to say because that's not actually what's on my heart. So as you know, I like to honor all the parts of us. And even though a lot of my work ends up being in empowerment, right? And it's, related in science and stuff like that. A part of me that is super duper present, but not always seen by the world is fiction.
Yep.
So I was like, this is an opportunity to share my favorite fiction with people.
I love it. Let's hear
So
it.
I'm not going to tell you who it's from or what the book's called because I think it'll diminish the quote, but
Okay.
we'll tell you afterward.
Yes.
So as far as I can tell, there are two emotions that keep the world spinning year after year. One is fear. The other is desire. It is a blessing as well as a burden to love and be loved so much that it can hurt so badly when love is gone. And then a companion quote that goes with it is magic is desire made real. And I've always loved the concept of magic. Like I think it's something that people disregard and play with, but when we or like disregard, but I think that when we play with it, right? And the idea that we can have things that we don't think we can, right? Or things are possible that we don't think are possible. Like, what's another word for it other than magical?
Yes.
So those quotes are from Discovery of Witches by Deborah
Ooh.
Harkness.
I love it.
Yes, that's something that has always spoken to me. I read that book yearly. It's just one of my faves, all-time faves.
Yeah. I recently, actually yesterday, I was speaking with someone and they recommended, I think you've done this too. You've recommended that I read something that's not a self-help book, and maybe I'll start there. Maybe that'll be the first book that is completely just for fun. And that quote was powerful too.
It's the character's name is Matthew. I won't tell you his last name because there's like a swervy word, right? But it's his essay to get into All Souls, which is a college in Oxford. So the author is also a professor, like a decorated professor. And these are the only fiction books she ever wrote.
Okay. Wow,
So
I
go
like that.
get it. Discovery of Witches.
Yes.
So good.
Discovery of Witches is on my list. Alrighty, let's jump into some of these questions. I'm really excited to pick your brain around empowerment, especially since our journey together. I feel like that's what it's been surrounded by in different components too. But boy, do I feel empowered. And that is so different than when we first met. Was that 2021?
Oh man, it was a while ago now.
Yep. Had a very different feeling, right? In the middle of burnout and all sorts of other things. But the first question I would love to ask is if you can share with us your personal journey towards empowerment and how mindfulness played a role in that process.
Hmm. Well, I love that we opened with my fiction quote because around the idea of empowerment, right? Um, there's fear, there's desire. Matthew got it right on the head, right? And there's so much that we think about um, that we might want, right? Or sometimes we are so stuck in the life that we're living that it's even too much to start dreaming of a life that we really want, right? Like it's just too far fetched, or it's even just too painful um, to imagine that you've been living this way and there's another way to live, right? And that's fear. And so for me, on my path to, I guess, empowerment, to freedom, to being able to live the life that I like love in all aspects of myself. It had a lot to do with being able to put down the fear, right? Or being able to see that the desire was something that existed at the same time. Like my whole life didn't have to be fear of change or fear of growth or fear of that I got it wrong in the past or fear of that I'm getting it wrong now, right? Or that I'll get it wrong in the future. And so for me, like I am a behavior analyst. I worked as a BCBA for a very long time, like a little longer than I'd like to admit. I've been around for a little bit. Um, and that job was so good for me when it was good for me, right? But there was a shift in me. There was an evolution in me. And I was kind of afraid to evolve like my life with the evolution of me. And so my journey was really around being able to embrace that desire, right? And make that magic, I suppose, happen. Because now, like, I went, from like a 9 to 5 job as a BCBA, really super duper burnt out. Feeling like I wasn't able to make a difference in my agency, even though I was trying left and right. And like I was just losing myself to this. To finding acceptance and commitment therapy and being able to start practicing that with myself, to becoming an author, to starting my own business, to moving towards the coaching, the mentorship, the supervision side of things, which was absolutely terrifying. As a mama, I started my business when my second daughter was an infant. My second child was an infant, and I had a toddler, right? So like at the biggest, scariest point, right? Also in the pandemic, I had to take a leap into like the idea that this wasn't the life I was going to live anymore, and that the desire had to be bigger than the fear. And then it was, right? And I made a whole lot of mistakes and I made a whole lot of, things that were challenging. The road was definitely not perfect, but I got to meet so many amazing people like you, right? My number one.
Yeah.
And I was able to, like, with the desire, right? Being able to be dedicated to that being an outcome, even though it was scary, allowed me to feel like I could actually live the life that I wanted to live, which I am at today, right? Like
Yeah.
I love my life so much. I love my business. I love like even the place that I've lived in and the things that my like moves have afforded me. It's just a dream come true. And it really is empowerment because I was able to sit with the fear and the desire at the same time, I think. So thanks, Matthew, for that quote, my fictional bay.
Yeah, I love it. And being able to make enough space for the two, right? And I think that that's a really big thing too. Something we've talked about in the past about two emotions that don't necessarily historically make sense to coexist, but they can. And practicing the making enough room for both. And sometimes it's more than two, right? Like
Yeah.
I've been angry and happy, and that might not make sense to other people and to the grand scheme of things, but to me, it makes sense, right? They're both valid and they can coexist in the same time. And so, fear and excitement, fear and empowerment, beautiful things can happen from that space.
Even though it can feel so confusing to learn to walk it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
Yes.
that's where all the parts of us being seen are important. Like it's not actually empowerment if you have to like push down parts of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of our
Yeah.
big emotions, including like fear or anger or resentment or, whatever might be present, um, are there for a reason, right? And they inform some of the other amazing stuff. And so we can't really have a full life. We can't have all of the parts of us present unless we
Yeah.
embrace all of them on our
Yes.
journey. So the
Yeah.
fear is just as important as the desire. In fact, I think that it deepens it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
its values, if we want to go towards the act language, right? You can't
Absolutely.
value something if it doesn't also kind of scare the shit out of you if you were to get it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember we would even talk about that. Magic is just keeps coming up. Like I would say like, oh, this feels like magic, you know? And every time like recognizing that spot and relating to it differently as, oh, this is a magical moment. Like this is how I know like something amazing is about to happen, rather than like, oh crap, like I am like so in it and so scared and like I just want to be in bed. Um it's We're relating to it differently and having a different outcome.
It's not getting rid of the
Curiosity.
emotion, it's
It's
relating to it
not, yes.
differently.
Yes, exactly. Because the more we try to get rid of something, the more we think about it, and at that point, it can become this bigger um, thing that just takes up lots of mental space. Um, and we can't live in the now if we're living in our head too.
Present
That
moment
gets challenging.
awareness.
Yes, present moment awareness. Absolutely. Alrighty, let's jump into question number two. Can you
Sure.
provide some insights into how mindfulness can positively impact decision making? So, a decision making process, allowing individuals to make more empowering choices that are aligned with their values.
Hmm. Well, I think like even just pointing to what we've been talking about already, the idea that there's
Mhm,
more than one experience present at any given time, right?
mhm,
Um, and that when we start noticing that whatever our brain offers first isn't the only perspective that's available to us,
yeah,
um, we have the opportunity to see more opportunity, like
mhm,
in general, right? A lot of people I work with, and then myself included, there's opportunities around us that we can't see because we're so stuck in like one frame of reference, right? There's just one
mhm,
thought process. So to get it a little bit more granular, maybe like um, for me, an example was like I can't like make money without my job,
mhm.
right? Which sounds
Right.
very reasonable, right? That's a really reasonable, lots of
Yeah.
evidence thought in my environment, right? And but at the same time, that means that's going to dictate how I interact with my environment. And I'm not going to
Mhm,
see the opportunities available to being able to move towards, my version of what would be empowering to me, which was, at that time being able to work from home and being able to do it on my schedule and be the definer of how that will look,
yes.
doing the work I want in the way that I want.
Mhm,
Um, but when I started to believe that there was another thing available to me, like another thought available, that was actually something that could happen, how could I make that happen?
mhm,
My opportunities in my environment changed And then I started acting, right?
Yeah.
Actions on things that became my reality at that time, right? Like it changed the way that I interacted with my environment. And it was because of mindfulness, right? Because mindfulness is only being able to see the way that you're thinking, being able
Mm-hmm.
to observe how your thoughts are there, and then being the decider of your thoughts, the director of your thoughts over just following whatever thought your brain offers. Um, and so then my whole world literally changed kind of magically because
Yeah.
I opened up my perspective to being able to
Mm-hmm.
see more opportunities available, right? And anybody can do that at any given time. It just takes practice because we're so practiced in relating to our environment the way that we're used to. It's a habit of thought. And mindfulness is breaking your habits of thought in service of something that matters to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite analogies is the switching of the glasses to see a new perspective. And that is so helpful. For me, like personally, I wear glasses, and I'll think of it as like changing from glasses to sunglasses, and that's my new perspective. Um, and sometimes I need like quite a few different shades, um, and that's okay too, right?
I love that one because like it is like that. Like when your brain offers you one thing, you see it
Yes.
in one way, like maybe they're your normal
Exactly.
glasses,
Yep.
but when you decide that that's not the only way you get to see life and you can put on the sunglasses or you can put on the blue light glasses or you can put on my daughter has these like purple glasses with hearts on the
Mhm.
eyes, right? And so
Yeah.
they make your whole world purple because the
Yeah.
glass is purple. Like you literally interact with your environment in a different way because you are seeing it differently when you change mindset perspectives. And
Absolutely.
it is actually kind of magical because it was always there, but you didn't
Yes.
see it. And so it
Yes.
wasn't the environment
Absolutely.
that changed. It wasn't the boss that got better. It wasn't the partner who finally agreed. It wasn't the raise or it wasn't the
Mhm.
house or the degree or whatever. It was you changing your perspective about what's available to you. And then that's like true empowerment, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not out of your control. Now it's in your control, or at least as much control as a person can have, right? And that is when we start being the drivers of our lives. And like that's the sauce.
Yes. That is the magic. It reminds me of something I heard someone say, and as soon as they said it, I kinda just stopped in my tracks and was like, "Yes, that is it." Um, they said reality is in perspective, and I think that that just, like, sums it all up. Not quite though, because I wanna still bring light to the choice aspect. I think that that is so important to realize that we do have a choice in really everything that it is that we are doing and how we decide to um, look at it, right? I'm going to bring in Sin real quick. So when she was diagnosed, and as she went through um, her treatment, her perspective was always so, um, I would say, empowering, and she would be. The way she looked at it was she she gave each day her best, and to be able to show up as her best and choose to show up as her best even though she was going through treatments, even though she was exhausted, that to me is like a beautiful example of empowerment. They can coexist. Exhaustion to the degree that she was experiencing, and also being able to be present for her daughters and do arts and crafts with her daughters and create those memories. She had she and would make over and over. that choice. That's very inspiring to me. Extremely inspiring.
I think that's an important point to bring in, because we do have a choice. Like, she could have easily chosen misery. She could have easily chosen pain to be the only perspective, or exhaustion to be the only perspective that was available to her. And I know that we've all been in that place, right? Where
Mhm.
this is all we can see, this is all we're used to, and it's effortful to make a different choice. Like, it is effortful. Like, it's not going to be easy. Mindfulness isn't easy, because over and over and over again, just like any habit, the environment offers us opportunities to engage in that, and we'll be looking
Yeah.
for them, and we'll be able to find them. Acceptance and commitment therapy comes from relational frame theory, which is a bigger, kind of broader theory, and it really, if you boil it all down, it comes to truth is relative, right?
Mhm.
And that was a beautiful example of Sin being able to choose, right, her relative
Yeah.
truth in this situation. She got to be the decider of that, right? And we all have that opportunity, but like you said, like, it was effortful for her
Mhm.
to choose that one, and it was very brave, right? And it's brave of us to be able to pick the thing that isn't habitual, that isn't easy for our brain, because it matters to us. And in your example, Sin, it was for her daughters, right? Being able
Mhm.
to be with them, in the time that she had, right, uh, was of highest importance. And she was able to choose that because it mattered, but not because it was necessarily easiest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. That was a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing that one.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, yeah. I love talking about her.
And I love that you love talking about her.
Alrighty. So for the thrivers listening, what ways can mindfulness support them in breaking free from some self-limiting beliefs and stepping into their true potential? Firsthand, I think when we first started working together, and I don't know that I've mentioned this, but Mallory is my mentor, and we've been working together since 2001. When we first met, I was experiencing lots of self-limiting beliefs, and my world was so tiny based on how I was perceiving it. So for the thrivers out there who might be experiencing self-limiting beliefs, what would you recommend? What's a good first step?
Hmm. I love the way that your questions are organized, because I think that they're building on each other. Because I think the answer to this one, right, is kind of where we
Yeah.
just came from, in recognizing that the painful or uncomfortable feelings, that we're having, aren't something to be resisted.
Mhm.
There's some level of kind of discomfort that is inherent with life, right? The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris is a great, like, quick, easy-ish read, to be able to explain that a little bit further. That, like, yes, we want to move towards things that matter to us, but what matters to us isn't always happy, right? There might be a twinge of discomfort. There might be a lot of discomfort, right? In Sin's example, right? Being with her daughters in that situation was painful, right? Because not only was she experiencing physical discomfort, but there was probably emotional stress around her situation, right? And being
Mhm.
able to be present was a choice, right? And it was probably an uncomfortable
Absolutely.
one. I know, like, when I started my business during the pandemic, it was a very scary, uncomfortable thing. I was pretty sure. I mean, part of me was sure that I was going to fail, right? And that was like 49%. It was just like 51% was like, I can't let that happen. It has to work out. Um,
Mhm.
and so it comes back down to your why. Like, why would this be an important thing to happen? Like, what
Mhm.
is it that matters to me so much, right? And can I hold space for that to be able to become, um, even though it's probably going to be uncomfortable, right? And
Yeah.
like embracing the weird or the uncomfortable as part of the journey rather than evidence that it's not working.
Mhm.
Did that
I
answer
like that.
did that answer the
Yeah,
question? Okay, good.
absolutely. Absolutely. This next question, you're right, they kind of builds upon each other. So what are some practical ways individuals, or what are some practical ways thrivers can cultivate a sense of empowerment in their daily lives through the practice of mindfulness? So we talked about the why. What would be the next step?
So I think that the next step is a really kind of easy one. Well, it's not super easy, but it's not complicated. And
Okay.
it's when you start noticing your experience and that the experience isn't something that you are fused to use ACT language, or that you are like the only experience available to you. So instead of saying, like, I am frustrated, I am mad, I am uncomfortable,
Mhm.
right? We can say, I am having the experience of, or I am having the feeling of, or I'm having the thought that, right?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
building that language of a small space between the experience and you, because you are not frustrated. You are you. You are not whatever big thought comes into your head. You are you. You're having the experience of emotion.
Mhm.
You're having the
Mhm.
experience of thought. And so when you separate yourself from the experience, when you separate yourself from the feeling, then there's more room to move, right? Like you're not as
Mhm.
stuck, you're not as locked.
Yes.
And what's really powerful about that is that that's just words, right? Like
Yes.
it's not
Yes.
that much extra effort. It's not something that you have, like everyone who's listening to this podcast and understanding what I'm saying can do this, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
um, and so sometimes it's just about breaking the habit, but being able to get unstuck with your language is the way that you
Mhm.
start getting unstuck in your actions. And that's really what mindfulness and specifically acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is really about, is a language intervention that
Yeah.
gets to the core of how you direct your thoughts, how you experience your environment to make space for new opportunity of action, to create new opportunities in the environment, to create a new fucking life. Like, woo.
Yes. Yes. I absolutely love that. And I think a couple more language switches or language, we'll call them language switches,
Yeah, yeah.
that we've done is the should and the could.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes. So oftentimes we get into the I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I should be prepping for a presentation I'm going to be doing. I should be meal prepping every Sunday, right? These are all shoulds. And when for me personally, when I say I should be doing all these things, there's a sense of pressure that comes into play. And then it becomes this like heavy thing. Um, and doing the language switcheroo to could create some of that space that you were talking about. Well, I could do those things. And I like to fill in that space with um, what do I want to be doing, right? And what is purposeful for me to be doing in this moment.
Mhm.
Also checking in with bandwidth too. And that's a newer one for me in um, as I process through grief, that's a lot in that I'm experiencing. And so the standard to-do list I used to have to just adds more to it. Those are shoulds that um, add more, even more pressure. And so to look at it and say, I could do those things. But what is truly important right now for me, as I'm navigating through grief, as I'm continuing to build out a business, as I'm, you know, stepping into a new role as a super auntie and figuring out, all the things and all the changes that are happening. So switching shoulds to coulds creates some of that space that's needed to be mindful, right? To ground back into the moment. The second one, do you want to share the second one? Because I know
No, I
it's
want you
in
to
your.
do it.
Okay, I'll do it. The second language switcheroo is but. And let's see. Let me think about an
But to
example.
and.
But to and, yeah. What's a good but? What's a but I've said?
Sure. So, I mean, it could be like, I don't want to use too specific of examples because um, but it could be, like I can't go do the chicken meal prep because it's frozen, right?
Oh,
But,
yeah.
right? But like I can't do the chicken because it's frozen. That doesn't really, that's not a but example. I'm trying to
That
figure
is
it
a
out.
funny example.
Um, sometimes it's like sometimes it's like either or, right? Like I can have this or that, and then we move it into and as well. So it could be
Yeah.
but slash or to and. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. I don't know. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. Isn't that terrible? We do this all fucking day.
Yeah, I know. We do it all the time. And then now, let me
It's
see,
one
let
of
me
those
breathe real
things.
quick.
It's one of those things that I like notice it happening, and then I'm like, ah, that's a but, or that's an
Yes, that's
or,
exactly.
right? And then it's an and.
Exactly. Yeah. And the way, even though we can't come up with examples right now, I'm sure we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Um, some examples, but the idea is that having a but almost makes the experience smaller or more like confined, I feel, and then adding an and like it makes the experience bigger, and it goes back into
Oh.
what we were saying about coexisting. You got an example? Okay, let's hear it.
So I could start a business, but I'm a mom, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so that implies that being able to start a business and being able to like be a full mom is not two
Mhm.
things that can go together. So it's almost like saying I can be a mom or I can be a business owner. And that's like in rejection of the fullness of you, like all the
Yeah.
aspects of you, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes when we have like a self as concept, right? Like we conceptualize what being a mom is versus being what a business owner is. In my example, what you can fill in your experience, wonderful thrivers, that don't seem to go together because being like a good version of that, right? Or like the
Mhm.
desirable version of that, like might conflict with the good or desirable version of the other thing, right? um, it requires you to change the way that you're perceiving something. It's requiring you to
Mhm.
contextualize it instead of conceptualize it, making space for good to be relative, right? Or
Mhm.
successful to be relative, or
Yeah.
for the role or the hat to be contextual to the moment instead of like the whole of your life. And
Yeah.
so that allows you, when you notice that you've got a rigid rule or a thought around the shoulds,
Mhm.
and that you open it up to, well, it could look like this, right? If it's important to me, if I want to choose it, like it could be uncomfortable. Could I be willing to make space for uncomfortable in service of an and, so that my life can be expansive rather than contractive?
Absolutely. And we love expansiveness.
Mm.
Give us all the space.
And I think that that's what empowerment is, right? Being able to have
Mhm.
it all is expansive, right? It's also empowering. And it's one step at a time, but it's in like the debunking of the idea that things don't go together.
Mhm. Mhm. And looking at our beliefs, right? And are they serving us? Because they might not be. It's time to check them.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of examples of beliefs that don't serve us. And they usually, like, to the original question, like the language switches, these types of things will point to where you have stuck beliefs. Like if you notice yourself saying, I am blank, right? There might be some stuck thoughts there that need to be a little bit more expanded. If you find yourself saying, I should, right? There might be some ways to expand something around that. If you're in buts or ors, then there might be an opportunity to expand into and, right? And so, like, if you notice yourself saying those things, those are places to start actually targeting for your mindset work.
I love that. Pinpointing it. Yep.
And some good ways to do that, because I think that was in the original question, was what's tangible strategies, right?
Yeah.
I do that with journaling. So I know a lot of
Mm.
people don't like journaling because they have like some teacher who graded them on journaling or who
Yeah.
graded their work at some point. And so they look at their work and they kind of judge it as being immature or messy or non coherent or whatever. But sometimes when you slow your brain down, because my brain goes faster than I can even really register all of it. And so by like writing, either typing or physically writing, I can slow my brain down, but then there's also a tangible product for me to review. So I can catch myself saying shoulds. I can catch myself saying buts. I can catch myself saying I am statements and then have the opportunity to go back and rephrase them, right? Or pick out where I'm fused and have the opportunity to be able to expand. Another wonderful way, of course, is talking with people who might be able to point those things out for you and then engage you in a dialogue around it.
Absolutely. And get that stretching in.
Hmm. Mind stretch.
Mhm. Yes, a mind stretch and get those reps in.
That's a good point too, because the more practice you get, even messy practice, like in the example of my, I call them fourth grade journals because they look like a fourth grader wrote them. Like they're messy, they don't make sense. Like they're not always full
Well, they're just for
sentences.
you.
Yes. But being able to take messy action, um, even when it's not, mm, it feels weird, right? Gives you the
Yeah.
opportunity to start creating more expansiveness.
I think also with messy action, and the journaling practice, that's a safe space. And I think being able to have that physical space that is safe for us to get it all out, it can also be very beneficial.
I agree with you. There's a neutrality to journaling and it's like free, right? Everybody's got their phone that they can just write in their
Yes,
notes, right? Or have easy
absolutely.
access to paper and pen or pencil, to be able to start practicing that. The trick about journaling is that you're going to resist it because it's going to be uncomfortable. Your brain is going to say,
Mhm.
I don't want to take the time to do that. What's it really going to do? It's going to take too long, or I'm just going to throw it away or whatever. I am notorious for writing journaling on the back of envelopes because it is the point isn't to keep it, right? The point is
Yeah.
to just be able to look at what I'm thinking right now. I'm personally a person who falls into the category of where you talk at people, right? You just have to talk to get it out. Like you have to
Yeah.
say it. You can't like
Yeah.
process it in your head. Um,
Mhm.
and so if I can write it down, if I don't have access to anybody, then I can even get clear on what I'm thinking and feeling because
Mhm.
sometimes I don't 100% know. Like I can't just process it in my head myself. It goes too fast for me. Like I
Yeah.
don't necessarily get an idea of it. And that's where the observer comes in of mindfulness. Because at the beginning, we were talking a little bit about noticing what you're thinking and being able to see that there's
Yeah.
other options available, right? Sometimes we don't see that we're even thinking until we have the opportunity to slow it down and look at it in a different way. And I think that's where journaling allows you to be messy,
Yeah.
but get it out, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's such a great practical way to slow down because sometimes it's just said, just, oh, you slow down. And this is such a practical step in doing so, in slowing down. Or if our brain is going so fast, writing it all out, and then the step of reading through it is the slower step. It's the time you're giving to yourself to read and see what is actually happening up there, Because our brain, there's no off switch to our brain.
And there's no delete button really. Like if you're to the point
No.
where your brain is deleting stuff, like you're, you've got you've got a lot of people who you probably should be talking to. But for the majority of us, there isn't a delete button, and there's going to be uncomfortable stuff that comes up. And the more that we can make space for that to just be part of our experience, right? The more we're going to be able to move forward. The more we're going to be able to have more of what we want instead of be sitting in that fear, right?
Mhm.
Or the shame or the
Absolutely.
embarrassment or the guilt or whichever is true for you.
Yes, absolutely. I am going to be starting something new where every guest that comes on Thriving Purposefully, I'd love to get to know what their personal definition of thriving is. So,
Mm.
Mallory, what's yours?
So I think that thriving is something that's evolutionary, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not something that can be defined um, like the definition of it is always going to be growing. It's always going to be changing. So
Mhm.
today my version of thriving might look different than yesterday's, might look different from tomorrow's. And I think being able to be open to all of like the experience, right,
Yes.
that you're having without resisting
Mhm.
it. Um, I mean, it's kind of like going with the flow, but also like
Mhm.
in a boat.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like it's
Yeah.
taking you wherever it wants to go. Like you're the
Mhm.
director of that, but it feels the way that you want to feel. And that requires you to be able to figure out how you want it to feel. Um, and right, like it's not just the desirable
Yeah.
things that we can also make space
Mhm.
for things being challenging, right? Like even this morning before I got on this call, my husband and I, who have been together for a very long time, who I love unconditionally, we've got two children together, we're getting close to like 15, we're actually past 15 years together now.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. We were kind of having an argument over language around like something that was said in the family while getting ready for school this morning. It was very stressful. And my version of thriving includes having hard conversations with people. It includes holding space for tears. It includes, holding hands through anger or through frustration.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that it took me a long time to realize that that was part of my version of thriving. But when I say I'm making space for all of the parts of us in in our life, like that's truly what I mean.
Mhm.
I personally feel like I'm always like a very emotional person. Like
Mhm.
my emotions are just something that like I can't not express or it makes me sick.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
call myself a hurricane human because sometimes my emotions are really big and other people get
Mhm.
caught up in my like hurricane orbit. And
Mhm.
I believe and choose to believe that there's people who appreciate that about me and find that to be vulnerable rather than think
Yeah.
that that's something wrong with me. Right.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
my version of thriving includes big emotions, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's
Yeah.
an evolution of my version of thriving. So I think that it's a complicated thing, and I think it's an individual thing, and I think it's an evolutionary thing, and I think that it'll always be shifting, adjusting, and changing moment to moment to moment. And I want to make space for that. That's my definition of thriving.
That is a beautiful definition of thriving. Thank you so much for sharing it. I
What's
love
what's
what's
yours?
mine. What's my definition of thriving? It's quite similar, actually. It's embracing a full experience of life, and that includes emotion. That includes my grief. That includes my joy. Um, I'm playing around with bliss and how bliss is a compilation of both joy and also can include some sorrow in it. Um, and so to me, it's about thriving is being able to take life as it's happening, and be able to make room for it and experience it in the present without trying to change it. And so for me, how that's coming up right now is allowing grief to move through me. And thriving to me meant something very different last year, this time. Um, Thriving to me will be something different tomorrow, a week from now, 6 months from now, next year. And so just the same way, thriving is, although we're talking about it in the sense of a definition, and that reminds me of like a dictionary, and dictionaries, I don't know how often they're edited, but thriving, I love for that to be ongoing. It our definitions can change. We go through life, we experience new things, and thriving is meant to feel empowered, in such a way that we are embracing all aspects of ourselves. The ones that we haven't had too much time to get to know, and the ones we've known since for years now. Um, that's my definition of thriving today.
I'm going to tie what you just said back to my fiction quote, my Deborah
Yes,
Harkness quote, that it's not fear or desire, right? Like fear informs desire, and that they go to
absolutely.
it's an and, right?
It's an and. Yes, an and with a big curiosity hat.
Mhm.
Yes.
I love that we're in sync on that. I think thriving is a complicated thing, and I think a lot of people don't get curious about thriving. I think that sometimes we have this image in our brain of what, like someone with a, like a yacht, or like, and the fancy clothes and the nice cars and
Mhm.
on the beach with the vacations and the nanny or the chef or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and they're like, oh, that's when I'm thriving. Right.
Mhm.
But when we put it on this pedestal that's unachievable to this exact moment, like it's not something that you could have tomorrow, without, I mean, I suppose there's ways that that can happen, but if you're
Yeah.
close to it being something, then it becomes so far out of reach that it's unachievable. So that the thing is like, well, why even bother? Right. And then you
Mhm.
give way to this. It's easier to just go with the momentum of what's been happening because that's true, right? But when you
Mhm.
start noticing that thriving can exist today, thriving can exist in this moment, even if it's a kernel of thriving, right?
Mhm.
Then you start getting curious about what your experience of thriving is. And then you have the opportunity to, and, right? Like I can be
Mhm.
frustrated and I can be thriving. I can be in
Mhm.
physical pain and I can be thriving, right? And that's when we start growing it from a seed to like a big tree, right? Is
Yeah.
when we start paying attention to the opportunities that we have now, rather than saying, I can have that when I am a
Mhm.
multimillionaire, right? I can have that when I get the degree, or when I get the job, or when I have the partner, or blah, 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 right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. The Thrive mentality starts now. It starts today. It starts by watering that seed. Just like you said, it will turn into a tree. And then what do trees do? They bear fruit.
And shade, and they make lots of beautiful sounds, and they make homes for all sorts of animals. And even when they lose their leaves or their branches, that like nourishes the area around them. Like it is
Mhm.
exponential thriving when you start paying attention to the stuff that's available to you now, right? And that kind of goes back
Right.
to the strategies that we were talking about of like the language switches, the
Mhm.
journaling, or a coach, and being able to notice that more than one thing is available to you, even though your brain might habitually be offering you one thought, right? Moving back into
Right.
that position of, I can see both, right?
Yeah.
Or more than one, and being able to direct those thoughts by choice rather
Mhm.
than just by what's habit of your brain offering you those things.
Yes. Adding some intentionality
Yeah.
to it.
Beautiful word.
Yeah.
Intention. Perfect word.
Intention. Yes. All right, Mallory, it's been a pleasure having you with us today. Can you please let the Thrivers know where they can connect with you and find out more about your coaching services?
Yes, thank you for having me. It's such an honor. All of my handles are Mindfully Mallory. My primary platform is Instagram. I put out weekly content over there. You can find me on YouTube for some of the more longer form content and for some more mindfulness practices. And then you can find out some of my offering packages at mindfullymallory.com. So if you're interested in life balance and burnout coaching, moving towards all of the areas of your life, or if you're a BCBA who's looking for acceptance and commitment therapy mentorship, those things are available over at my website, mindfullymallory.com.
And I'll include all of Mallory's information in the show notes for you below. Thank you so much for listening. Please comment, like, and subscribe on all your podcast platforms. You can also catch me on Instagram at Journey with Joss or visit my website, journeywithjoss.com. Thank you guys, and I'll see you soon.